Please welcome Shireen Bhan, Managing Editor, CNBC-TV18.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on our annual post-budget event, the Budget World. This is CNBC-TV18's effort to try and get the budget makers, the budget architects to interact with industry in their very first interaction post-delivering the union budget. As we just highlighted for you, Budget 2023 has delivered on the promise of higher capital expenditure. That was the hope, that the government would continue to do the heavy lifting as far as public spending is concerned, and that has what the budget has delivered. As far as industry goes, that was the big ask. Outside of that, there hasn't really been much tinkering. It is a process of continuity from where things were left off as far as the last budget is concerned. In terms of additional capital allocation, the railway capex has, of course, been a headline number as well. Outside of the overall capex number, which, as we pointed out, is up 33%, the railway capex coming in at 2.4 lakh crore rupees. That is an all-time high. There is plenty there in the budget by way of allocation for other sectors as well. Perhaps some could argue that the rural development budget has seen a decline, and of course one disappointment is on the area of disinvestment, where the disinvestment target has been reduced quite significantly down to just about 50,000 crores. But let me not get in the way of announcing and inviting our first guest to join us here at the CNBC TV18 Budget Verdict. I will have a lot of those questions for the Revenue Secretary, but I also encourage all of our industry leaders who are here with us this evening. This is your opportunity to quiz the budget makers on what you liked and what you would like clarified from the budget fine print, since we have had the last 24 hours to go over the fine print. It is my honor and privilege to invite on stage the Revenue Secretary, Sanjay Malhotra, to please join us here for the budget verdict. Mr. Malhotra, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Malhotra, before I toss it across to the industry captains here, who I know are waiting to quiz you on a whole host of issues, the number one question, and I think this is something that came up periodically through the conversations that we had. One, of course, as far as tax collections are concerned, the government has been able to over-deliver on the estimates that were put forward in the budget last year. But the larger issue and the larger question that people are posing at this point in time is why this conservatism as far as tax collections are concerned, and when can we actually expect the government to do better, especially in the context of a higher tax to GDP ratio? And I'll ask you this question in the context of the GST, but that in just a bit. But on the conservatism as far as the tax numbers are concerned, the government's thinking on this.
No, I'm surprised. I mean, I would like to dispel the notion insofar as the budget estimates for the next year are concerned. Let me assure all of you that the numbers that we have put forth are very much in line with the GDP numbers. So the GDP is estimated from a budget perspective to grow nominally at 10.5%. And you yourself mentioned that our tax to GDP ratio has been constant.
Yeah.
And so is it not realistic to assume that the tax to GDP ratio will not change dramatically and remain the same? And so in line with that, the revenue projections for this next year are also at 10.5%. So they are very much realistic. You are aware that these depend primarily on three things. One, the GDP, how the GDP does. If it does better, then then the tax revenues should also be more, and if it doesn't do as well, then it will be lower. The second thing it depends is on the rates, and we haven't factored in, I may tell all of you, we have not factored in the relief that we have given, of about 37,000 crore on the direct taxes side. Indirect taxes is of course very less, but I would like to inform all of you that when we did the budget estimates for next year, the relief on the personal income tax has not been yet factored in. So in fact, if anything, it's an overestimate. Thirdly, it depends on collection efficiency, and that's what gives the buoyancy, right? Either through the tax rate or through the collection efficiency. So we have assumed, right now we have assumed 100%, But yes, we have done well in this year, particularly we have done well this year. And there are a number of areas where we have tried to plug loopholes, to broaden the tax base, to deepen the tax base. And so yes, there is some room, but let's see, from a budget perspective, I think it's a realistic estimate. It's certainly not a conservative estimate.
Okay, well, those were the words used by some of your colleagues, that this is a conservative estimate and you hope to be able to better that. But let me ask you, since you talked about an improvement as well as the need to sort of do better in the context of indirect taxes. Yesterday we had the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, the former chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, N.K. Singh, talk about the fact that there continues to be a divergence as far as the GST rate is concerned and the revenue neutral rate, and something that the government has acknowledged as well. Now, there has been a long pending demand on rate rationalization as far as GST is concerned. That's not a budget item, but it is going to be something that perhaps the government will now look at the budget exercise being over and done with. On this issue as far as what is the GST rate and what the real revenue neutral rate is and how the two shall meet, what is the way forward?
No, so that's an interesting question, but let me tell you that the revenue neutral, let me remind all of us here that when GST was being implemented, at that time the revenue neutral rate was thought to be about 15.4%. Yes. But actual practice experience tells us that in practice over the last 65 months, we have data for 65 months since it was implemented, and the actual effective rate has only been about 11.5%, so which means 3.9% lower. And despite that, you have seen that there is good buoyancy. We have done better insofar as GST is concerned. We have done better than the growth rates in GDP over there. In terms of rationalization of the rates, it's a continuing exercise, but I think most of the work has already been done on the GST side. There is a committee, there is a GOM which looks into it, and from time to time, they make suggestions which come to the council, and the council takes a decision on them.
Okay, but you believe that most of the work has been done, because there was a GOM that was set up, as you acknowledged. The recommendations of that GOM have not been taken forward, but can we expect that there is likely to be any significant change as far as the rate structure is concerned?
Most of the recommendations of the GOM, I think almost all, have been taken forward.
Okay.
So, but there is still, some issues are pending with them, and that will always remain so. And so as and when, the GOM makes those recommendations to the GST Council, the Council will consider them and take a decision on them. But apart from smaller changes, as of now, we don't have any major agenda. So insofar as GST rates are concerned,
so
nothing
no convergence
major.
As far as slabs are concerned?
Not for the moment.
We will continue with this current structure?
Not for the moment.
Not for the moment. Well, that's an important clarification coming in from you. You said in your opening comments, Revenue Secretary, and I'll toss it across to the audience in just a second, but you said that a lot of the changes brought in the budget have been to also plug in the tax arbitrage and plug the tax loopholes. Now, the insurance sector is not particularly happy. The tourism sector, the travel operators aren't particularly happy. People availing of the LRS route in some cases aren't particularly happy. But let me just focus on two aspects, insurance as well as tourism, because the government said that you want to focus on tourism in mission mode. Both in terms of the allocation, it's the same as the BE of last year. There has been no change as far as budgetary allocation is concerned. And by doing away with some of the exemptions, etc., that were offered to tour operators, etc., aren't you then negating what you hope to do on the tourism side? And second, on the insurance aspect, both with the move from the old tax regime to the new tax regime, which is an exemption-less tax regime, as well as the tax arbitrage that you have now decided to plug, aren't you veering away from the aspiration of making India a more insured economy, a more insured market?
Okay, so let me take your second question first. First of all, let me clarify, and I think all of you are perhaps already aware, it's not about insurance. The tax is certainly not on insurance. It is the tax exemption being withdrawn on investments, primarily investments, because the way, insurance industry works in our country and also, in many other countries, India is not that way, unique. Of course, we accept that. But insurance, of course, is totally exempt. Any proceeds out of on death to the dependent, that's totally, so pure term insurance, all of you are aware, is totally exempt and continues to be so. It's only the investments beyond a particular point where it no longer actually remains insurance, but it becomes more of an investment rather than an insurance, that we have removed the exemption, and I think rightly so, because the exemption is for insurance. It's not actually, for investments. If you want to make investments in equity, you want to make investments in government securities, I don't think, we deserve, the tax exemption status for that. So pardon me, this relief that has been withdrawn, and that's again, for very, very high values, because we do understand that there is a savings component which is attached, which has been for times, since insurance has been introduced, perhaps attached with, insurance. So we have continued with that. But others is something, I think it was time that we removed it. It's still very high, 5 lakh and 2.5 lakh in ULIP. So 7.5 lakh will give, cover with savings of about 1.5 crore rupees for an able-bodied 35-year-old individual, as per, some of the most popular schemes. Tourism, you see, I really don't think, that it should really, the LRS, I think you're talking about the increase in rate about from 5% to 20% on LRS. So first of all, it's not on, the tickets. It's on the foreign travel tickets. It's on a tour package that is bought. But then, would there be any person who would be buying a tour package, whether it's foreign or domestic, especially foreign tour package, from his savings? None. None to my mind. All of them would be buying it from their disposable incomes, which are taxable incomes. So they are in any case, going to pay taxes. And so for those who are paying taxes, it really doesn't matter. And they are paying taxes, they are not, in the 7 lakh income limit or 10 lakh income limit where their tax rates are much lower. No, they are much beyond that. So they are paying, we feel at least 20%. And so that's why, we have increased it to 20%. And travel, I said, travel already, there is no tax on it. So it should really not, make any difference. I don't think anyone, buys a ticket from savings. It helps us on the other hand. So this is, the perspective, if you look at it from the perspective of the individual who buys, from the revenue perspective, there are, certain individuals we feel escape getting taxed. And so that's where, the plugging in of the loophole comes in.
Okay. I know that many people here have questions. Let me bring Shubhrikant Panda into the conversation. I think he is here, right here. Shubhrikant, you've got the microphone on the table. So, yes, go ahead. The president of FICCI, go ahead, Shubhrikant.
Mr. Malhotra, I'd first like to congratulate you and your team and, of course, the Honorable Finance Minister for a budget which I think is bold, progressive, and what had been, FICCI's and I suppose every industry chamber's refrain about being growth-oriented, I think it certainly delivers on that. Just one quick question among some of the recommendations we had made. One was relating to RODTEP for some of the sectors which were left out initially, and that was in a very different scenario when those sectors were doing extremely well, primarily commodity sectors. That is not the case now. But in any case, whether a sector is doing well or not, RODTEP is more about remission of taxes and duties, and that enhances manufacturing competitiveness. So just wanted to understand the thought process for these sectors to be like pharma, steel, etc., to continue to be out, and is there any timeline in mind for that? Thank you.
Yeah, so RODTEP really, it doesn't, I mean, which sectors to include and all, that doesn't actually, come in as a budget exercise. In the budget exercise, we really, give a budget, the numbers, the expenditure side. So it's basically about that. So whatever requests are there relating to sectors that need to be further included or their rates need to be changed, etc., that's looked at by another committee, the RODTEP committee, that looks into those things, and those can, always be considered by them. It's not really a budget thing. So, and so that's why, you don't find anything relating to RODTEP sectors.
Oh, and I agree with you. It's not a budget thing, and of course it will also depend on the kind of negotiations that the Commerce Ministry will put forward. But what is a budget thing, and I want to address that with you, and that was also one of industry's recommendations, was that the 15% concessional tax rate should continue beyond the sunset of 2024. That's not been the case. Why is that?
Why we didn't change the sunset now, I mean,
no, in the context of the aspiration of India becoming the manufacturing magnet, trying to become the alternative, destination for supply chains at this point in time, the assumption or the expectation was that another 5 years would have provided a path to predictability, and hence people would have found it easier to put in investments here. So from that perspective, that was the recommendation, but what was the government's thinking on that?
Yeah, so aspirations, see, we try to meet all aspirations. I mean, that's our effort. But if the aspiration has now become that every year we'll extend a scheme by another year so that, next year again we come up with that aspiration and again, we take that step, I think it's a good thing that the government has dispelled that, and government has said that, well, if we have a sunset date, then we mean, it is the sunset date. And so in line with that, we had increased it, last year, but that was because of COVID. So I think it's good that in case, unless there are some extenuating, circumstances because of which we have to do it, I think it's good if everyone knows well in advance as to what those dates are. And on the other, I mean, this is on the lighter side, but otherwise, we have had good traction. There are about 3,500 companies which have already, started availing of the benefits under this scheme. And this is not something, which we could have 15% tax rate. I'm sure all of you would agree is not a rate that we can have or afford to have, perpetually.
No, I appreciate you putting that on the table. But since you said that, if there is a sunset clause, then the sun must set as per that date. So if I were to extrapolate what that means as far as the FAME subsidy scheme is concerned for electric mobility, because the sun is expected to set there in 24 as well, would it be fair to assume that it will?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not, because I don't deal with the subject. I don't deal with the subject. But what I meant is that if we announce something with a certain sunset date or certain, conditions, then it's good for all of us, everyone, because you work, with those conditions. It's not good, to change those days to change those conditions, to change those rules, unless there are reasons. But FAME, I do not deal with it, so I will not be able to, answer something which I don't deal with directly.